Hello. In 1484, somewhere inside the walls of Milan, Leonardo da Vinci had a problem. He was getting paid by the royal family, the Sforza family, but he really hadn't done anything that they found valuable. And so he was pressed with building military implements to improve, obviously, the domain of their power. And one of his inventions, or one of his designs, was what you see here. It looks like a Lincoln log bridge, but actually is quite profound. What it allows the Italian or the Milanese soldiers to do is, as they're walking across the countryside, they can each carry a single stick or piece of wood. And when they come to a chasm or a river that they have to cross and bring equipment across, they basically can self-assemble this without any tools or nails, and it can hold cars. Why am I telling you this? Well, first of all, I think the bridge is a great image for the work I do and the things I think about, because what I'm trying to do is provide, at the right time, self-regulation support when the risk is high, and I need to get those young adults, primarily what I'm interested in, over that chasm. I also think it's a cool story, and I like Leonardo da Vinci, so that helps. And if you want to see how to do this in your backyard, you can see great YouTube videos on this. And all you need are 2x4s and some dowels. Some disclosures. Currently funded by the NIAAA. We'll also receive some royalties from a local startup in Pittsburgh. So I probably don't have to tell most of you what self-regulation is. Most people, when they hear the word self-regulation, they think of the marshmallow test that was done, 45 miles from here at Stanford in the 1960s. And it's been popularized by that. But really, it's managing the conflicting impulses in the service of long-standing goals. And as I'm sure you're all aware, young adults are particularly susceptible to self-regulation problems. And there's a whole research from neuroanatomic and biologic studies to confirm this. And as it relates to drugs and alcohol, the immediate pull of the drugs or the alcohol dominate those long-term goals around their health and their success. And so what's needed for self-regulation? Well, you need a few things. You need to be able to commit to goals, you need to actively strive to reach them, and plan how to overcome them. And this requires standards of understanding the standards of what is desirable and what is not, the motivation again, and you need to be able to monitor yourself and your behaviors, as well as this idea of willpower. So over the past 10 years, as Michael has mentioned, I've been, so I'm an emergency physician and an aspiring clinical psychologist. So as you can probably tell from this. So I've been working what started as a very rudimentary idea about using text messaging and just interacting with young adults and getting them to change their behavior has matured as I've done this work. And I'd like to think I'm more thoughtful now about what I'm doing. And the current working model, as I have here, is really, you'll notice a lot of similarities with like the theory of planned behavior, theory of reason action, although this is a temporally or state-based model, not a trait-based model, where you have trait factors for sure, like alcohol use severity in an individual, impulsivity, but you also have these predominant situational risk factors around like cognitive things, psychological, social, and environmental, and all these are kind of playing into their desire, their intention, as it's known in the theory of planned behavior. And somewhere in between the intention, what they call the intention-behavior gap, there's something that happens. And this is really what I'm focused on targeting through self-regulation processes and support. So here's the bridge. So again, to kind of reflect on Billy's talk, you have time as a process, and then periodically you will have these periodic risks and elevations and risks a young adults face. And what I'm trying to do is build a bridge over these risks, right? And so through the use of techniques like self-monitoring, goal support, and performance feedback. So I'm going to tell you a story in two trials. The first one is the TRACK trial, which was performed between, we enrolled young adults between 2012 and 13, and what I'm calling the Match 1 trial, which was 2017 to 18. So the TRACK 1 trial, we had research associates in the emergency departments screening non-critically ill young adults. So these were not people that were intoxicated. They were just coming in. We were opportunistically screening them. And those that had hazardous alcohol use, we randomized 765 into 3 arms. On the left side, you can see what we call SA plus F, which is really SMS assessments and feedback, and that was randomized in a 2 to 1 to 1. And then we have the SMS assessment arm, and they didn't receive any feedback, but we assessed them over a period of 12 weeks, just like the intervention arm. And then the control group didn't do any text messaging, and we followed them for 3, 6, and 9 months. So in our intervention model, again, we wanted to build this bridge over the risks. And how did we do this? So the first thing is we employed through text messaging some self-monitoring, periodic self-monitoring, and then goal support and performance feedback. And I was going to show you some slides, but it takes up too much time to actually go through what the text messages look like. But essentially, we decided on bracketing weekends because we know from a large amount of literature that most of the hazardous drinking that occurs in young adults happens between somewhere Thursday and Saturday on weekends. So we decided that that was our temporal area that we were going to really focus on. So on Thursdays, we would send a text asking them if they plan to drink. We would ask them if it was likely that they were going to have a hazardous drinking episode or above 3 or 4 drinks for a man or a woman. And if so, we would ask them to commit to a goal to limit their drinks to below that threshold. And then we would come back to them and provide performance feedback on Sunday, and we asked them what the max number of drinks they had, and we gave them normative feedback based on how they performed. So overall, over a period of 12 weeks in our intervention arm, those about 80% of those text messages were responded to, so pretty good adherence rate longitudinally. And what we found was when we asked them the question about their plans on those weekends, about half the time they planned on drinking. If they planned on drinking 3/4 of the time, or 69% of the time, they told us that they were likely going to have a hazardous drinking episode. Not surprising that these were young adults who screened in for hazardous drinking. And when we prompt them to commit to the goal, around 59% of the time, they said that they were willing to commit to that goal to limit their drinking. I want you to remember that number, 59%. So what did we find? We've published these results, and this is from PLOS One. And what you can see is that the intervention arm, which is in the dots, had reductions that were durable out to 9 months past. So that's 6 months at the end of the intervention. And did we solve the problem of binge drinking? Absolutely not. We made a small dent in it. So it's in the past month, it was about a 1.5 to 2 episode reduction in hazardous drinking. It was about a 1 to 2 drink reduction when they went out drinking. And at 9 months, we started to see a signal on alcohol-related injury prevalence dropping in that group. So we said, okay, this is great. It's not the be-all, end-all. We need to work on this. How do we improve it? So we did some focus groups. We did some exit interviews, and some things that we learned. Number one, we learned that 30% of the heavy drinking episodes were not happening on weekends, despite what the literature said. And we said, well, this is an opportunity. We want to reduce drinking more. We got to focus for those days when they weren't drinking. The second thing is the heavier drinkers told us, well, you're asking me if I'm, and some of these people were drinking 20 drinks on an occasion, and we asked them to set a goal to drink only 5 drinks, and they told us, you're crazy. There's no way I'm going to drink 5 or 4 drinks when I'm drinking 20. So, and I'll talk to you about how we address that. So those were the 2 big changes. So the first change, we decided that we were going to use their baseline information to tailor the program, the next iteration of the program, so that if they told us they typically drank on a Thursday and a Friday, those were the 2 days in a week we were going to interact with them. If they told us it was a Sunday and a Tuesday, those were the days we were going to interact with them. So we picked the 2 days for that individual to interact with them instead of just bracketing the weekends. The second problem with the adaptive, we created an adaptive goal setting prompt. So instead of pushing everyone to the 4 or 5 threshold, what we did was if you drank more than 10 drinks in the past 2 weeks, we would push you to 10 drinks. If you drank between 5 and 10 drinks, we would just reduce it by 1, and that would adapt over time as we got data on them. So the idea actually I took this from the sports literature when we looked at some of the most novel applications to get people to improve their step count. They were doing these sort of stepped procedures where if you're training for a marathon, I wouldn't ask you to go run 20 miles on your day one, right? You would run 3, then 7. So taking that concept, we were going to kind of step them down from their typical drinking. So those were the two big things. We added some other things based on, again, my refinement of understanding the literature. There's a lot of interest in self-efficacy. We were going to provide some self-efficacy goal support. And the last thing is if they committed to a goal and made it, some of them were upset that we told them, well, bad job, because even though if they were above their threshold. So we said, okay, well, we need to tell them they did a good job with the goal, even though we can't advocate for them to drink 7 drinks. So we had to kind of balance those two competing notions. So we were funded by the NIAAA. Now we're in year 4 of an R01 out of year 5. We've recruited around 1,200 young adults. I'm going to present what was our pre-trial to kind of make sure everything was running. But basically the idea is that we deconstructed this intervention into 5 different arms, really 4 arms and then a combo arm. And the track, so you can see they're called track, plan, use, goal, and combo. In the track arm, we only assessed their drinking plans, their desire to get drunk that day, and then we assessed how much they drank the next day. In the plan arm, we gave them feedback based on their plans, but we didn't give them any feedback on their performance. On the use, we gave them feedback on their performance, but not the plan. The goal, we focused on just the goal, commitment, prompt, and the support, and the combo is the combination of all those. And our hypothesis was that obviously the combo group, you would need all these behavior change strategies to maximize your impact on reducing drinking. But really this was just a pre-trial to make sure that we got everything right. So what did we do? Following the same procedures as the last trial, basically we, in the emergency departments in Pittsburgh, identifying at-risk young adults, 18 to 25 years old, who reported hazardous drinking. We screened them, we enrolled 149 of them into these, and then we randomized them into those 5 arms and followed them for 3 months. So I didn't tell you what these people look like, but here's an example of their demographics. So this is a high proportion African American. Only 38% are actually in college of these 18 to 25-year-olds. So we're talking about like mainly working, not working, but definitely not in the majority not in school. And the third thing that's important, that's overlooked in a lot of mobile health research, is that none of these were treatment-seeking young adults. Okay, so they weren't coming into the emergency department looking for help in any of our trials. A lot of mobile health research is focused really on the treatment-seeking populations, which is a different problem, I think, once you have people engaged. So we're kind of out of the blue, approaching them. And you can see this as shown in their stage of change. 30% are pre-contemplative. They've never even thought of their drinking problem. None have actually tried to change in the action or maintenance phase. And you can also see there's a high rate of cannabis use and tobacco use. So 60% of these young adults are using cannabis as well as hazardous drinkers. We don't need to get into the specifics here, but basically here's a flow diagram of how they would actually go through on the typical drinking day. So we asked them of their plans of drinking, if they were planning on drinking, how severe is their desire. And so this sort of been an interesting concept and learning for me because, some literature, when you look at it, the desire to use a drug is conceptualized as craving. However, young adults that are typically they don't have alcohol use disorder or alcohol dependence, craving may not be the right term. So we didn't want to use the term craving. If any of you do craving research, I mean, number one is because it's stigmatizing to a young adult population who doesn't self-identify as having an alcohol problem. Second thing is some people conceptualize craving as severe desire or desire that causes problems. So we use the term desire to get drunk or desire to achieve a certain state of intoxication. And then we gave them, in the intervention, we would give them feedback on those. And then we would hit them with the goal commitment prompt like I described to you, which was adaptive. We would provide some protective behavioral strategies and then assess their confidence in meeting that goal and give them self-efficacy goal support. What we found here is that when we use the adaptive goal prompt, 85% said yes to our goal prompt versus the 59% that I asked you to remember. So this was really revelatory to me because it really confirmed what the young adults, number one, were telling us, but that we figured out how to do safely, we believe, as well as effectively to get them to engage with goal commitment when we adapt it to their own personal drinking pattern. So here's just an example of what this actually looks like, which I haven't shown you yet, but like I said, I don't want to take too much time, but basically we would have their name. Hi, John, it's the match team checking in. Do you plan on drinking today? They could respond yes or no. Essentially, this is like a chat bot. from 0 to 8, how much do you desire to get drunk? They would put in a number, and then we would give them feedback based on their desire. So in this case, it would be, remember that the excitement induced by that first couple of drinks often goes away after that. Would you be willing to commit to a goal to drink less than 7 drinks? So this is somebody who the computer system said their typical average drinking in the last 2 weeks has been 8 drinks. So we reduce it by 1, and they would say yes or no. Like I said, 85% of the time they would say yes. And then we would give them the protective behavioral strategy, something like, great, learn to predict the situations that put you at risk and come up with strategies. And then we would ask them on a scale from 0 to 8 how confident they were. They would report back, and if it was low, we would try to give them some self-efficacy goal support. If they said yes, we gave them positive support. The next day we would come back, again, how many drinks did they have yesterday? They would put in a number, and then we would tell them whether they met that goal or not. And this was all automated. So in this pilot, we found, again, consistent with our hypothesis, that the combo group had the greatest reductions in the proportion of binging over the 14 weeks of enrollment, as well as the drinks per drinking day. The 3 other groups that were the pieces of the whole intervention have some sort of an intermediate effect, and the AC, which is our control group, actually increases their drinking over the 14 weeks. We've seen this throughout all of our trials. We actually don't believe it's iatrogenic. I've presented this a number of times. Our hypothesis is that we're teaching people how to track their drinks, which they never did before, which they get better at over time. And so they're probably just increasing their accuracy. It's not that they're increasing their drinking. More interestingly, or perhaps just as interestingly, is if they committed to a goal, they had a lower odds of actually the mean drinks, the proportion with a binge episode as well as the mean drinks consumed. So this kind of gives validity to our idea of using this self-regulation support really around goal commitment and really adapting it to them. So that's the gist. So where are we at now? So we finished that trial, and now, like I said, we are around 1,200, 1,300 young adults into what is the follow-up to that study, which is identical. And we will see what it shows. Where do we go next? So I think, as Michael referenced, I've done some work and published some work using phone sensors to identify, right, those risky periods. So instead of trying to figure out from the baseline what days they typically drink, can we pick up some patterns that identify when they're going to have a drinking episode? So that's the point number 2. Here's what I'm running up against. Your predictions improve the closer you get to the actual event. But the closer you get to the event, the harder it is to change behavior. So, and I think this is something that Billy's group as well is trying to figure out, and we just are really, I think this is exciting because the next generation of researchers are going to have to figure out how do you balance those two things. Obviously, once somebody's drinking, the salience of any message that we can give them is reduced because of cognitive impairment, things like that. The further back you are from the event, the less salient those messages are because it's not relevant to their life. So where's the sweet spot? And what kind of a design would you do to try to find that sweet spot if you had sensors that can kind of, because all we're going to get from a group of sensors is a probability. So the probability that they're going to drink in the next hour is X. So when that X rises above a certain threshold, do we change that threshold and see how they respond? So that's sort of the interesting next steps, I think, as well as collecting other features from their environment that can affect their desire, their self-regulation. And then the third thing is identifying the right message, content, and framing. And this is really, there's a whole literature on communication techniques, persuasive messaging, even outside of messaging, what are the options? So videos and graphical feedback and all those sort of other things you can layer on top of a basic textual feedback. So those are all sort of exciting things. And finally, one of the many bridges of Pittsburgh. Although you'll see blue sky here, which we don't see that often. This is probably the one day a year we actually see blue sky in Pittsburgh. They took this picture. But thank you guys. Sorry. So yeah, your question, if I can summarize it, is that do you tick them off by bothering them too much? No, I.
Not bothering them, but
Yeah.
because you know, like, whether they're going to drink, because maybe now it's kind of like asking someone, how much are you craving alcohol?
Yes,
How much are you
right.
craving alcohol? They're like, well, now I am.
Yeah, it becomes reactive. We haven't seen reactivity. We've limited it to, so in our pilot, I didn't kind of, because we were limited in time, talk about this data, but we actually had people that got pinged only once per week, twice per week, and 3 times per week. And definitely the people that got pinged 3 times per week got tired of us. That was part of the pilot. I didn't talk about that, but in our full trial, we actually limited it to 2 days a week. So we said for this population, again, it's about knowing your population, they really are not drinking, the 80% of them, more than once or twice a week. So even on the days where they told us at baseline they drank that day, we decided 3 days a week was too much. But in terms of the reactivity question, we actually haven't seen reactivity to the constant pinging. But again, these are not opioid use. This is not severe use. So we may see it, and we've seen it in our opioid population when we did sort of similar stuff. But yeah. Oh, so this was a 12-week, they're all 12-week active intervention periods, yeah.